Definitely want to see a Dynasty Warriors 4 Empires review? Well, here it is. Sometimes to move forward in life, you have to go back to the past. In order for a more accurate timeline of the Empire series, we need to take a look at the first iteration in Dynasty Warriors 4 Empires. Released in the US in 2004 for the PS2, this will be my first 6th gen console game I'll be reviewing on this channel. In all honesty, the setup I have used to record this looks like a mess, so I won't be showing this, but it was all captured from an actual PS2. Regardless of that fact, is this Empire's title worth playing, or is it better to stick with the sequel? When you start the game, you can choose Empire mode in order to begin your conquest. Unlike future titles that offer multiple scenarios, you are only given two here: historical and fictional. Historical has all the factions within a set position and features historical battles to participate in, while fictional is all just random. You can still create a custom faction in the historical scenario, however, by selecting an empty space. To keep up with the theme of my Empire reviews, we will take control of Monghuo and unite the land under the Nanman tribes. Similar to other Empire's titles, you get a cutscene introducing your faction. One thing that I noticed is how different each intro is depending on which ruler you have chosen. You'll also start with two generals who may or may not have any additional dialogue to offer. As Monghuo, we are given the boomerang goddess Zhu Rong and a generic officer in Mong Yu. As expected, the game opens up in the strategy screen displaying the map of China. Your generals will propose two policies to enact during this time, which can range from replenishing troops and utilizing tactics to other means such as setting up alliances and recruiting new officers. Unlike future Empires titles, you can only enact one proposal per turn and cannot gain any more orders even if you own the majority of the map. As a matter of fact, you can't even enact specific policies and have to rely on your officers providing you the policies you want in a given turn. You can't also stockpile on tactics, meaning that you'll need to get lucky and hope that a general proposes the policy you want for that specific turn. This makes the proposal system feel far more RNG than it should. I actually have quite a bit to say about the strategy portion, but I figure we should get to the combat side of things. Since the Yellow Turban Rebellion is happening and has territories all over, we will start by taking over a nearby province. As expected, you can view your weapon, equip items, and examine the conditions before going to battle. Troop numbers still ultimately determine your army strength compared to that of your opponent, so you want to be at least on equal footing. You can win a defensive battle with less troops, but good luck with that same strategy for invasions. Since this is an invasion, our goal is to conquer the enemy main camp to capture the territory. In invasions against the main ruler's province, victory can also be achieved by defeating the enemy ruler. If you've played any Dynasty Warrior game in the past, the combat is pretty much to be expected. You'll have your normal attacks that you can combine with your charge attacks. You also have a Musu attack that can be used once the meter is full, which you may be using a lot depending on who you're up against. As always, I recommend for you to get used to who you're playing as to really maximize their value. Capturing bases is a bit different here. Instead of being able to aim for guard captains similar to Samurai Warriors 2 Empires and Dynasty Warriors 5 Empires, you'll need to defeat every single enemy soldier present in the base. And yes, every single soldier that you see, including those annoying archers shooting at you outside of the limited draw distance. This isn't a problem at first, but it becomes incredibly tedious as additional enemy troops and officers will appear out of nowhere to reinforce the base. One of my favorite features is the ability to duel other officers. Once you defeat an officer enough times, he or she will challenge you to a duel that you can accept. Once accepted, you are taken to a small arena where you'll have 45 seconds to defeat the officer. Defeating the officer will lead to its capture, while a draw will lead to the officer staying on the battlefield. Being defeated here by the opponent will end the battle as expected and will be counted as a loss. There's definitely a risk versus reward here that makes these battles very fun to participate in. However, the late game duels tend to not be as enjoyable for how tanky the enemies become. It becomes nearly impossible to take out the officers within the 45-second time limit. More on the late game quirks later. While I always enjoy the hack and slash nature of these games, what I don't always enjoy is the performance of some of these games, especially for the PS2. For the most part, the game does run at a smooth 60 frames per second. Unfortunately, this gets hampered by extreme slowdown once there are too many enemies that appear on screen. Officers especially tend to chug the frame rate to a crawl. Funny enough, the game has some benefits being this slow, as you are able to time your strikes and blocks much easier. And you're definitely going to need all the help you can get, because my goodness, this game can be freaking brutal and becomes a slog by the end game. I mentioned before how tanky officers and even normal troops become by the late game. Even with a fully leveled officer with the highest level weapon possible, with items that increase your attack and huge troop bonuses, the enemy officers take far too many hits to go down and will block almost everything. Going up against Lu Bu or any Musu officer for that matter will be a huge pain. Most of the late game for me involved fighting the officer, taking too much damage, healing up, rinse, and repeat. Also because every troop needs to be eliminated for each base you want to capture, and there isn't a set limit for how many times an officer can return. I've timed out to invasions 3 times when I haven't done so in any other Empire's title. After each battle, you are given a summary of your performance as well as how many points each of your friendly officers have earned. If you captured any officers, you can either hire or release them. Be warned though, you can only have a very small handful of officers. Instead of being able to station officers within your territory, you can only have a grand total of 10 officers and 10 lieutenants. This means that your officers are basically responsible for every piece of territory that gets attacked. This isn't too big of an issue late game, but definitely is one for the early to mid game as you begin to expand your territory and have to constantly play defensive battles. Since the yellow turbans are a problem, I was eventually approached by an Imperial envoy to participate in the Yellow Turban Rebellion scenario. Since I really didn't have a reason to decline, I accepted and saw a pretty cool cutscene. Honestly, these cutscenes are always cool to see, and it adds a bit to the dynamic storytelling found within the Empire series. To fast forward a bit, I also participated in the Battle of Hulao Gate and ended up getting curb stomped by the always OP Lu Bu. I figured that nothing else historically would have happened, but it actually led to Lu Bu slaying Dong Zhuo himself and becoming his own ruler with Diao Chan and Zhang Liao by his side. Eventually, I did beat Lu Bu, but unfortunately I didn't have enough money to recruit him and had to settle with Zhang Liao. I also ended up with a ton more Musu generals eventually, including Ma Chao, Tao Ren, and the one-eyed immortal Xiahou Duin. So leveling up is actually a bit strange here. The max level each character can get is up to level 5, but it depends on what happens during their time under your rule. For example, Zhu Rong can level up if promoted to Grand General. She can also level up by reaching a certain amount of points and reaching max weapon level 9. It's easy to keep track of, but it's a shame that you can't just level up based on your officer's deed like most other Warriors titles. Also, just for awareness, the AI has no such restriction to leveling up, so be prepared for every officer you encounter being a level or 2 above you for really no reason at all. I also realized that if you don't accept an officer's proposal for several turns, they will complain about it and tell you to accept their plans next time. Honestly, this comes across more as flavor text, as I never had any consequences from this. Still, I find it worth bringing up for just how often I came across this. Eventually, I was finally able to unite the land under the non-Min tribes with the defeat of Sun Jian in his final territory. I played as his daughter Sun Shang-Tsung to really add as much drama as possible. In all honesty, I was pretty freaking exhausted at this point and was just glad to have finally wrapped it up. Similar to other Empire's titles, you were given an ending cutscenes based on the characters within your domain and a pretty kick-ass ending song. It honestly sounds like an anime theme song from the mid-2000s, like something out of Full Metal Alchemist. Really good stuff. And unfortunately, there really is not a lot to unlock outside of a few screenshots and the ending scenes. As always, you can create an officer, but it is extremely basic with only a handful of models and outfits to choose from. You can also pick your weapon as well as your voice and stats of your character. Other than that, nothing to really write home about. And before we wrap things up, I'll talk about the soundtrack here. At this point, it feels like Koei can just roll out of bed and create an all-time memorable soundtrack. The same is true for Dynasty Warriors 4 Empires. While the same metal and Asian fusion is still present here, many of the songs are far more experimental in nature. Overall, really good stuff here. And that about does it for Dynasty Warriors 4 Empires. Is it worth playing? Kinda. It definitely plays like a prototype to what would become of Dynasty Warriors 5 Empires. Still, there are a few notable features here like the unique duel system and the fact it uses the movesets of Dynasty Warriors 4 over 5. Unfortunately, the game is bogged down by overall tedious gameplay, constant slowdown, and some insanely cheap AI buffs. Personally, I'll stick with Dynasty Warriors 5 Empires and Samurai Warriors 2 Empires, but it is a nice historical piece just to see where it all started. Either way, thank you all for watching as always. Since this is my first PS2 game review, let me know how I did, if I did a good job or not. I have another one that I plan in the future, so stay tuned for that. And as always, this is Powerhouse, signing off.
離れてしまうけど遠回りすればいいさ知らなかった景色が